Well, welcome to this channel. I'm Jonathan Whitcomb. I hope that this is recording properly. We have to see when this starts. I never know exactly when this starts, but welcome to this. This is the YouTube channel with my name, quote, Jonathan Whitcomb, unquote. And we're going to talk about the fiery flying serpent of scriptures. Serpent, well, it's not really a snake, technically. But we're going to get into that. Let's see what, if you would need to contact me for any reason, whether to report the sighting of some flying creature or to communicate with me any other subject that's related to modern pterosaurs or the possibility of non-extinct flying pterodactyls, you contact me at this website, or it's a form, a very simple form. You can send me an email. But what are these fiery flying serpents? Let's get into this. This is a sketch drawn by the United States Marine Eskin Kun, who was stationed at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba in the middle of 1971. And he was alone one bright summer day in good weather, no obstruction to his view. He was shocked to encounter these two flying creatures. He called them pterodactyls. At close range, he was at the coast, and he saw them flying close to the coast. Low elevation, a good view of them. They were quite large. I have many other blog posts, web pages, and books, and YouTube videos about his sighting, including the other channel that I have on YouTube. It's called Protect Animal Life. But this channel we're on now is with my name, Jonathan Whitcomb. So here is my webpage about the fiery flying serpent, www.flyingserpent.com, if you'd like to get information from there. So we'll be getting into this now. I have here, just printed out a copy of a scientific paper by David Wetzel quite a number of years ago. He published in a peer-reviewed journal. And it's fascinating, this concept. In the Old Testament, it talks about the fiery flying serpent. Well, what is that thing? What was it at that time in the Old Testament? This is believed by some persons, and I'm going to get maybe I can quote you one opinion on this, which I don't agree upon, but I want to show you what this is. It says, what kind of serpent was it? The Hebrew word for fiery means burning, a probable reference to the burning pain of the bite. And this says, possible explanation is the very fast speed the snake can strike. It's going to leap through the air and so on. My associates and I do not believe that. No. And it says, what's else about this? The fiery, what does fiery means? Oh, I don't see that. I can't quote it here, but I can tell you generally what the opinion is. That my opinion, the opinion that my associates and I disagree with. We have a different interpretation. That is, a fiery refers to the burning pain that results when a person is bitten by that snake. But no, that's extremely indirect, and it's not it's a horrible way to give a name to an animal. I mean, even in ancient times, if you consider the Israelites to be primitive at the time of Moses, but even with primitive people, why would you invent a name that included a word that refers to how a person feels when they've been injured by that animal? It just makes little sense, really, to me. It's not a good explanation. The reason we have that kind of weird explanation is because so many people in the modern times do not realize that modern pterosaurs are reality. Humans have lived at the same time as non-extinct pterodactyls, if you want to call them that, technically pterosaurs. But they actually live today, and they're uncommon, if not rare, and they're nocturnal, and they're scattered across the earth, so they're not discovered yet officially in science as of the early part of 2021, at least. my associates and I hope to see that change as we do more research and interview people and hope for a good video footage. We're living in a realm of cryptozoology, but fiery refers to the bioluminescent glow of some of these species of flying creatures, including, we believe, this particular animal that lived at the time of Moses, was referred to in the Old Testament. Fiery flying serpent. We take the fiery to be literal in the sense that the Israelites at that time just assumed it was a fire. If you see a light at night that's not stars, it's, the light on the ground or close to the ground. They assume it's fire, so they call it fiery. Flying, why would it be called flying? Well, it's not because snakes can jump. That's very poor interpretation in our perspective. We understand that people that have no idea about modern pterosaurs, they're just trying for anything. So, well, flying means that snakes jump out or they leap or something. No, that's extremely poor. It's not as bad as fiery, but it's still not a good explanation for the word flying. It's basically, we interpret that to be precisely literal in the sense that the animal flies. It has wings and it flies. Extremely literal. Now, the one thing that we disagree with in a different way about the fiery flying serpent is third word, fiery flying serpent. Here, we believe that this is not technically accurate. It's not actually a snake, but it appears like a snake because of the long tail, lack of feathers, somewhat similar to a snake. We believe, I refer to not just David Wetzel, but other researchers in recent years and decades, Garth Guessman, for example. We believe that when I'm speaking mostly for myself, but I believe my associates and I have similar opinions. The idea is that when this creature was resting and perched somewhere, it would fold up the wings, and so it would look more like a snake than anything else. So the ancient Israelites just used the word snake for it. They didn't have another word for it. Excuse me. So what does this mean? A fiery flying serpent, how could that be? We don't have anybody here yet. But I haven't announced this live stream. So if you happen to come up to be with us, welcome. Glad that you're here. There, we do have some viewers here, so I'm glad I'm not talking to nobody or talking to myself. But this is from scriptures. It's also in the Book of Mormon. This is a particular scripture. I don't recall. It's the early part of the Book of Mormon. It occurs the fiery flying serpents. And, I don't have anything on that right now, the details on it. I could quote it, but basically it doesn't quote the King James Bible in that part of the Book of Mormon, but it does refer to why it's important is that the children of Israel were directed to look up to this emblem, this on a pole that Moses made under command of God, and that people who had faith and they looked, they would be healed, and that we need to use that as a symbol in more recent human generations, including the life of the Savior at that time. That we look at the Savior for life, and he gives us life and heals us from our infirmities, and our sins, and our weaknesses, and so on. So it's a great symbolic value, but it refers to that by those three words, fiery flying serpent. Now, why do my associates and I believe this? We have many eyewitness testimonies of flying creatures that appear to be modern pterosaurs, and we're convinced that they are. This is not just in certain parts of the world like Amboy Island and Papua New Guinea. We could get into that. Let's see, if you need to contact me, you can do it here. But I led an expedition there in the year 2004. This is in the Southwest Pacific, in the nation of Papua New Guinea. And my expedition did not result in any photos or video evidence of this animal, but we had wonderful interviews And one of those interviews was not the one I consider most important, but it relates to this concept of bioluminescence in flying creatures. And that was an old man by the name of Michael. He's of Opie Village, which is just a little bit west of Gumblegon Village, which you probably have no idea where that is. It's on Umboy Island. But I interviewed him. He used a combination of 3 different languages: a little English, teeny English, a little bit of Takpisin, a little bit of the Kovai language. So I was able to piece together what he said. But he said that a long time earlier, in 1949, he was at Gumblegon Village, very close by, and there was a grave, a recently buried man there, and nighttime he saw the light come down, what they call the ropen, the glowing light that came down to the grave, and the next day the villagers came to the grave and they found it empty, dug up. The body was gone. And Michael explained that he, why that happened is he come up, he kachim dislaman in I fly long mountain, took him to this Mount Bell, I suppose that's the closest mountain there. Took to the mountain to eat it. And anyway, I won't go into details about what words they use, but that's basically what they believe. This has happened before, but not in recent generations. In other words, the ropen of Umboy Island, we call it ropen, R-O-P-E-N. Well, I spell it R-O-P-E-N, ropen. I was looking for that with my guides and my interpreter. We just couldn't get far enough to get to Lake Pung, but we did have some wonderful interviews. Daylight sighting 10 years earlier than my 2004 expedition. Anyway, that's a long story. Basically, most of the natives that we interviewed were not eyewitnesses in daytime when they can see the form and features of the animal, but they saw the light flying at night, and I took statistics on that. I published a peer-reviewed scientific paper in a journal of science. Let me give the name of that. I don't have it down so you can see it, but it's reports of living pterosaurs in the Southwest Pacific. And that, I do go into details on different things. But basically, why do we believe that this flying light is a modern pterosaur? Well, many reasons. One of them is 2 sightings that were analyzed, and there were 2 interviews with Jonah Jim, the native, and the native Jonathan Ragu. This was a long story. Let me try to get it to you shortly. After my expedition in the Southwest Pacific, I went home to the United States, and within a few weeks, 2 other Americans followed where I was, went to Umboy Island, where I had been. They conducted their own expedition, were searching for the ropen, and they interviewed 2 natives, Jonathan Ragu, whose sighting was in the northwestern coast of Umboy Island, and Jonah Jim's, whose sighting was just south of Lake Pung on Umboy Island. The thing about the sightings is, I'm sure about Jonah Jim, let me tell you, he saw not only the form and features, the wings, but also saw the glow. It wasn't at that time the entire body of the animal glowing, but he saw part of the body was glowing. And that confirms what we've known from traditions and other sighting reports and so on, that the ropen with long wings and flies at night glows. It has a bright glow. It doesn't last very long. It's intrinsic. It can turn on the light, but it doesn't apparently have control of how long it can glow. It just uses up the whatever secretion on the skin or whatever it is, uses it up in about 6 seconds, more or less, give or take a second or so. In 6 seconds, then the glow is gone, and it has to wait before that capacity is comes back, or the secretion can be applied to the skin again with whatever way it does it, if that's what it does. So it can glow for about 6 seconds, and then it can't glow for a while. And then for my scientific paper, I took statistics of how many times that people see it flying away from the light, flying away from the mountains in the interior, out toward the coast where the reefs are, where it catches fish or giant clams or something. How many times it flies at night in the early part of the night, and how many times the light is seen going away from the coast toward the interior of the island. And it does relate to the traditions and what people say, that it flies out at night toward the reefs and catches fish or whatever it catches, and then it comes back before the sun comes up, sunrise in the morning. It relates. It's not positive proof that it does definitely support the native ideas. Anyway, how does that relate to the fiery flying serpent? We don't say it's the same species, and I'm not saying that anyway. I'm not saying that the fiery flying serpent at the time of Moses that was causing such problems with a venomous bite, apparently. Not saying that that's the same species that we now have on Umboy Island in the last few decades. No, it's not likely, because so many pterosaurs have existed and lived at various times in the past, whatever time that was. We're not going to go into details in this particular live stream video about when dinosaurs and pterosaurs lived. That's a deep subject. We'll get into that, but not now. We just need to deal with this fiery flying serpent. It may be that this particular animal is extinct now. It may have lived at the time of Moses, but is now extinct. But we have a number of many sighting reports that indicate that these animals of a general type, similar, probably related species, do still live. Maybe different species have different characteristics, except that they do glow. They have a bioluminescence to them. In other words, the word fiery, we believe, is not some weird, very indirect, strange way of naming an animal according to how you feel when you get bitten by one, which is a very poor way of naming an animal. You don't name a bear with a word that has to do with how you feel when you're suffering from the claw marks in your stomach with being torn by the claws of the bear. That's about as indirect as you can possibly get. We don't believe that fiery refers to how you feel when you're bitten by a snake. That's absolutely totally wrong. And the word flying we take literally, but others before us traditionally have assumed that means just it can jump or a long distance or whatever, which we think is really poor. It's not as bad as the first word, but it's still a very poor way of naming an animal that doesn't fly. And we have ancient accounts here in this scientific paper by David Wetzel, and there's a number of pages I have on this. But I'll just tell you generally from my memory, there are at least one ancient historian that did mention this winged serpent-like animal with wings. And it lived in that part of the world where Moses was centuries earlier. And it still existed then, centuries after Moses, and it was dangerous. And the people found a way to get a predator to catch them and chase them away, so they were more free from. But the ancient historian actually saw many of the bones of these winged animals that used to exist there. Now, I should correct myself. I said they still existed. I don't know exactly the details off the top of my head on that. I haven't read this report lately. But anyway, they did live for a certain time after the time of Moses. How many centuries that was that they lived, I have no idea. But they were known to exist centuries later. And there was no doubt that they had wings. There's no doubt about that. They're winged animals. So we believe serpent is just a little off. My associates and I believe that snake is actually it's technically in scientific terms for modern science, of course, it's way off. It wasn't a snake. But still, for the ancient Israelites at the time of Moses, it's understandable. Excuse me. It's understandable that they would call it a snake. As I mentioned earlier, if its wings were folded and it was perched somewhere, it could look more like a snake with that long tail. We believe this type of animal, which still exists in some species, not necessarily closely related to the fiery flying serpent of the Old Testament, but in some species it exists today, and these are basically descended from some type or species of rhamphorhynchoid pterosaur that has a long tail and a flange at the end of the tail. And I have received hundreds of eyewitness reports over the past 17 and a half years from eyewitnesses themselves who report to me what they've seen. And this is from 5 continents. 5 continents I've received eyewitness reports, not rumors or somebody told me so. And all this is from the eyewitnesses themselves. So I have a lot of information about modern pterosaurs in the last few decades, in the last few years, and actually the last few months in various parts of the world. Now, so you understand my position here is I have no doubt that the animals are real. There's no doubt. They're not from misidentifications and not from hoaxes. And we better probably get into this a little bit unless somebody has some... we don't have any comments here. And in case somebody's wondering, well, how can we be sure that these are not just people playing hoaxes or misidentifications of some bird or bat or different birds and different bats at different parts of the world at different times? And maybe just because I want them to be pterosaurs, that I say that that's what they are, but it's a lot more to it than that. The reports I've received over the last 17 and a half years are from persons around the world. I told you 5 continents. It's a lot more to it than just 5 continents. It's that they're from different cultures, different languages, different religious beliefs, different educational backgrounds, different ideas about philosophy, about the origin of life, all different people, very, very different backgrounds. And yet there are significant details in what they tell us about what they saw. For example, one of the most common ones is that there's no feathers. And another one's very common is a long tail. Not all of the reports give this, and I'm not saying that all modern pterosaurs were necessarily of this type of rhamphorhynchoid-like pterosaur that's kind of weird with a head crest. That's weird for a rhamphorhynchoid. But they are similar in many ways from different people that have different backgrounds. So it doesn't make sense that people would be, if they were hallucinating or having delusions, for example, just theoretically, let's say people all over the world are having delusions and hallucinations, and they just happen to, all of those people with this mental health problems just happen to be able to get on the internet, even if they're from countries that don't have any computers, are still somehow able to get on the internet, somehow able to find me, and somehow able to report to me as if they actually had an encounter with details about who they were with when they had the encounter. They were not alone often, and how they saw it and what they felt and so on. All these details, it doesn't make sense that people all over the world would be having hallucinations or delusions or some combination of those two in a way that would indicate a rhamphorhynchoid pterosaur. That doesn't make sense at all. And it doesn't make sense, too, that they were hoaxes, because I compiled statistics on these. Let me see if we got nobody here yet. Statistics on these flying creatures, which I believe are living pterosaurs, modern pterodactyls, if you want to call them that. Statistically, there are important factors that indicate that there was no major hoax involvement with 128 of the more credible sighting reports that I've accumulated up to the end of the year 2012. And early in the year 2013, I analyzed them and went through them and found these details. One of them is the estimate of size. Now, of course, this can be mistaken. People see something flying and they've never seen it before. How can they estimate the size accurately? Well, they're still given estimate, and they give me the estimate. All this relates to the possibility of hoaxes and why I'm convinced these are not hoaxes. They're not people lying or deceiving me or trying to deceive me. That as you compile all the statistics about how they estimate the size, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, 25 feet. One scientist who was with his wife and had their sighting in Perth, Australia, estimated that the wingspan was between 30 feet and 50 feet. That is huge. Far, far larger than the largest bird in the world that's known to science. But the thing is about these statistics, and I get them all together, there are no outliers in these statistics, statistically speaking, no outliers. And it's a very even range, going up 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet. Very even range. There's reasons for that. We can't get into all the details now. It's far too complicated. It takes a whole nother video for that. There are reasons for that. But one thing we can learn about that is that hoaxers are not involved. And for 128 sighting reports, it's possible, I admit, that there may have been one person playing a hoax, maybe two persons, maybe out of the 128. Possibly, I don't think so, because of the way that they communicated with me. I'm a forensic videographer. I used to work for attorney firms, and making videos, interviewing people was my profession. It was my responsibility, I felt, to do a professional job. It would be to get an idea and a feeling for whether or not somebody was telling the truth. That was my profession. For what it's worth to you, you can believe what you want. But statistically, it shows too. Now, hoaxers would have some kind of, they'd lie in some way, saying, oh, this is 20 feet wingspan, you know. And another hoaxer would lie in a similar way, saying, big exaggeration. So hoaxers would not want to get any impression that maybe it's just a bird misidentified. They'd want to shock, and being a big size would shock people, and they want to be sure that there's no doubt it was the pterodactyl I saw, even though the person was telling a lie. Well, look at the statistics. There's no bump anywhere that would indicate anything larger, significantly larger than a bird. The bird sizes are just flat, and then as you get the larger bird sizes, the statistics are even. Bigger than, 15 feet, bigger than any bird, 20 feet, way bigger than any bird. There's no hoaxes in that. And also, why would so many hoaxers give this description of a long tail? Now this, at the time of the beginning of the year 2013, this was extremely big difference, a big difference between long-tailed reports and reports of apparent pterosaurs that did not have long tails. The ratio was like about 19-1, as I recall, maybe 20-1. That's a huge difference in that ratio. That means even if people were mistaken somehow, and some people just didn't notice it, they didn't see it clearly. Still, that's a huge difference. And some of these persons actually saw the legs separately from the tail. There's no doubt it was a tail, because the legs are down here running. It's just taking off, and the tail is long, sticking out behind it. There's no confusion about those. The tail is sticking behind it being legs, because the legs are down here running as the animal's getting up into the flight, as in the case of 1944 sighting on the mainland of New Guinea during World War II, seen by Dwayne Hodgkinson. Anyway, this just does not make sense that so many people would report this from different cultures. And in Umboy Island, where the natives had never seen a film or anything, or seen a book, and I interviewed Gideon Coral, the native, and I said, in your school on Umboy Island, this remote tropical island, did they have any picture in a book or something of a ropen? He said he thought about it and said, no. He was being honest, I think. He didn't have any, they didn't have any book in their little school, tiny little school, very primitive. that had a picture of a ropen or any pterosaur or pterodactyl. They basically learned the very basic fundamentals of things like English, and which is one of their 3 national languages in that country. English basics, not advanced, really crude, elementary English, probably a little math, and that sort of thing. But these persons are in different parts of the world who have no reason to think that this kind of animal would be having a long tail. They report a long tail. And the people in the United States, now remember, basically for North American Americans, for decades, people have been raised on films like King Kong in the 1930s and like the Jurassic Park movies in more recent years, where you have what they call pterodactyls, but of course technically pterosaurs, that have short tails or no tail visible. But this is a totally different type of pterosaur that existed in the past that we know of from fossils. And most paleontologists feel that for the majority of these in general, for the most part, this kind of pterosaur actually lived earlier than the other types that are seen often in films. They lived earlier, and for the most part, not without exception. I'm saying in general, these long-tailed pterosaurs with flanges at the end of the tails, so some people call diamonds in modern times, or diamond shape, or other words, ball, or they have other words that they use, but this kind of long tail is not what you would expect. So that's another evidence that there's no hoaxes involved with those 128 more credible sighting reports that I felt have more credibility to them. And then there's another detail that seemed to be that they're not hoaxes. It slips my mind at the moment. But we need to keep in mind, too, that those statistics that I compiled up to the beginning of the year 2013 included one fact that about half of the sightings, or a tiny bit more than half, involved at least 2 eyewitnesses to the sighting. In other words, it's highly unlikely that these are from hallucinations or that sort of thing, mental illness, delusions. Delusion is not the same as a hallucination, but it's basically the result is the same. The person who has a mental health problem says that they saw whatever that really wasn't there. But you wouldn't have one person with a mental health illness causing the person standing next to him or her to actually think that they saw a pterodactyl when there wasn't one there. No, that doesn't happen. Besides which, I pay a lot of attention to what's reported to me. And from my experience with these hundreds of eyewitnesses, only a tiny, tiny fraction show any indication of mental health problems. I won't go into too much detail about any particular one, but generally, it's about, in the neighborhood of 1% of the sighting reports I have any indication of any degree, an indication that the person has a mental health problem that may have caused that person to report a pterosaur that really didn't exist. The vast majority of sightings of people from there communicating with me appear to be perfectly healthy, and sometimes there's more than 2 eyewitnesses to a sighting. Sometimes it's a group of people. So, there we have it. The fiery flying serpent is, I believe, a modern living pterosaur of the time of Moses. The fiery flying serpent was a species related somehow to the modern ones that we have in our day. There is a lot of indirect evidence. We have a possibility of them in North America glowing. We have reports from the Yakima River, for example. I've been there with 2 other of my associates who actually witnessed the flying lights, and they told me about it, and they showed me as we're standing on the bank of the Yakima River there in southeastern Washington State. And they showed me where the lights were flying, how they took off from one tree and the light went down to the surface, acting in such a way that they believed it was trying to catch fish or was catching fish. And there was a number of them, not just one. And those two associates of mine who were standing with me on the bank of the Yakima River were very serious. They were not playing a joke. One of them was a biologist who's taught biology in a small college up in Oregon, as I recall. I think it was from Portland area, if I remember. He once taught biology. And they're convinced that they were related to the ropen of Amboy Island, and this is in the United States. Strange to tell. But let me go on a little bit more about that location. We were near this particular tree that was on the bank of the river. That same tree was involved in another sighting, and next, I think there are two sightings, but anyway, it was one sighting in particular for that tree. This was a different man who wasn't there with us at the time, but the two other Americans from the Portland, Oregon area that were with me on the Yakima River bank, they told me about this other man that reported to them that he was driving to work on that road that was right next to where we were. On that road, in the early morning, he had seen a pterodactyl, and it was in a tree. Guess which tree it was? Exactly the same tree where these two other men were telling me that they had seen a light come out of the tree and go down to the river. I think it's not a coincidence. I believe that this is some species of Rhamphorhynchoid-like, similar to Rhamphorhynchoid, like pterosaur, possibly related to the ropen of Amboy Island. I should be speculative. It could be distantly related. I don't know, but it appears to be what people call a pterodactyl. And there's other places in the United States where I've got similar report from the Midwest. Years ago, a man was fishing somewhere at night, and he didn't want to reveal his fishing location. It's his favorite fishing location. But anyway, he told me that he saw this light flying down, definitely not a firefly, flying down to near the surface of the river. And he's told me about it. He said he contacted me as he's wondering if this is maybe something like the animals I've been studying. I believe it was. There is, of course, the Marfa-lights in southern Texas. That's a long story. Should we get into that? I can't spend all morning on this because I have to get ready to go to church with my wife. But we're let's see if we don't have any questions yet. I can just keep on going here. If you want to contact me, use this. It's a very simple forum. And you can get in touch with me if you have a sighting to report or if you have anything that you want to discuss with me. But basically, we have a tremendous amount of eyewitness sighting material that we can go over. I don't have nearly enough time to go into too much detail, but in Marfa, Texas, in that area, desert area in southern Texas, they're what they call Marfa-lights. Now, some people go there, they go to the viewing platform, and they look off at night, and they'll see lights in the direction of a particular highway that comes out. If I'm not mistaken, it's a north-south. I don't remember the highway number, but it's a north-south direction. The highway runs going north, I believe, toward Marfa area. Anyway, people see that, and at some nights, there'll be a optical effect, like a mirage type effect, which will make the lights appear very strange, and they will wobble or whatever. I don't remember the details. But they will say, oh, I saw the Marfa lights. Oh, they are weird. And then other people say, oh, yeah, you saw the car headlights. And they know this is weird. And they say, well, those are not the Marfa lights that are referred to by the people that live there and who are referred to by the scientist James Bunnell. James Bunnell used to work for the, I think it was a jet propulsion lab, but he was involved with the space flights, the manned missions to the moon, and he knew rocket science, and he knew detailed science of the rockets and propulsion and so on. And he, to make a long story short, he spent many years putting up cameras with getting permission from the landowners, putting up cameras, recording these flying lights that are not the lights that are seen toward the highway, that are just misidentified car headlights. No. A few times a year, maybe 6 times a year, there will be a very strange light that comes in a different direction in the plains of the desert there. And they will behave very strangely, and they had characteristics that are very different than car headlights. And he analyzed this. He's a scientist. He's analyzed it. This is his specialty. Propulsion, rocket propulsion, the way light is formed, what light you get from different kinds of the wavelengths of light and so on. He says it's very strange light. It's produced and it flies horizontally, more or less, over just a few feet above the surface of the desert, and it behaves a certain way. The Houston Chronicle newspaper published my ideas about that interpretation of that, and of course they ridiculed it because flying dinosaurs in Texas in modern times is just too much. But I'm glad they published it so that people can be aware that at least one American is researching the possibility that those strange lights in Texas are related to the ropen lights of Amboy Island. Maybe I should just give you an example here why I believe that, because it's, shouldn't we believe James Bunnell, who believes there's some kind of non-living substance in the soil or something, energy force that causes this? No, in the warmer times of the year, in the summer, and at nighttime, there will be occasionally the strange appearance of these lights in southern Texas. It'll appear like one light, and then it'll seem to divide into two. And one of the lights will stay where it is. The other lights will travel and travel and travel for a long distance. I mean, like hundreds and hundreds of yards, long distance. And then that light that had flown away, with this light staying in place, that light that had flown away, it'll come back, but it turns off sometimes, at least sometimes. I don't have all the details of the statistics of it, but for example, sometimes it will go like this. It will turn off before it gets back to this one. There is no explanation, I'm sure, that makes any sense in terms of a non-living kind of energy force that will cause a light to divide into two, with one staying where it is over a few feet above the desert and the other going a long distance away, and then that light that went away will come back and then turn off before it gets back to this location. That's not a non-living phenomenon. It's something intelligent involved there. We have time, so why don't I get into this and tell you my speculation, conjecture, whatever you call it. It makes sense, and I don't know of anything that makes sense in that particular type of sighting. What I believe happens is, because it's the summertime when it's warmer, you have the big brown bat, Aptesicus fuscus. The big brown bat will be in that area of Texas, not hibernating, but actually out and active. And insects will be about and flying around lights. And if there's a couple of intelligent flying creatures that have a bioluminescent capacity, whether they're birds or giant bats or pterosaurs, whatever they are, they're intelligent flying creatures that have a bioluminescent capability. This is what could happen in that sense. This is what I believe it could happen. They turn on their lights and they're close together, so from a distance people would think it's one light because they're so close together. And then as they turn on their bioluminescence, one of those flying creatures exits. The bats that are around catching the insects that are around those two lights will see that one fly away. Those bats might become a little more brave and start to come in and pick up little insects and so on. Just about the time the bats are becoming brave enough to get a little closer to this dangerous flying predator, that they might know that it's dangerous, but they're getting the insects, the other bioluminescent flying creature will come in, grab a bat. And then the two flying creatures that have bioluminescence, they'll change positions, so to speak, and do it over again. Maybe not exactly the same place, but the interesting thing about this, James Bunnell kept statistics, and I examined them in detail. I'm a scientist. I want to know things from my perspective and see what I can find out. That particular behavior, a light seeming to divide, and then one will go away, and then the light will come back, that is only in warmer weather. It's not in cold weather. Well, I like that because it seems to support my conjecture. In the cold weather, you don't have insects, so you don't have the bats around, of course. The bats are not going to be out in cold weather looking for insects. But they do have lights that behave in different ways. And remember, only about 6 times a year do these strange, weird lights come over that part of Texas. They come back, and they're only there for 1 or 2 nights in a row, never for 3 or 4 nights. No, because they have a particular, I believe they're flying creatures that have a particular route, that they have particular, you could call it migration if you want, but particular part of North America, they go to different areas at different times. And when they come in cold weather, they don't appear to have a light dividing. This is nothing like that. They'll be doing a different behavior with their lights, and I believe in that case, in the colder weather, they'll be hunting the burrows of animals, I don't know, jackrabbits or peccaries. I don't know, I don't remember the Spanish word for the peccary. Is kind of like a little bit like a small wild pig, or maybe rattlesnakes. I don't know what they catch, but they're behaving differently because it's the colder weather and they have to hunt differently then, but they still come back to that general area. I believe the reason why the statistics show that that kind of weird light does not appear more than 2 nights in a row. They compare 1 night and then the next night, but not 3 nights or 4 nights, nothing like that, is because they've already gotten the easy meals in that area, and then they move on to somewhere else to try to get the easier meals. And one of the things, let's see if there's any questions here. None, so we'll continue. One of the things, and let me be sure that we do have somebody listening and watching, because I don't want to be talking to myself. No, there are people here. Okay. Thank you for being here and listening and watching this. Now I lost my train of thought. The Marfa lights, they have a certain route to take. There's another thing about these. Now, James Bunnell has a lot of research, incredible details. He knows about these lights in the terms of the spectrum, how they behave. Strange light. But he's not a biologist. So he doesn't take my point of view. He doesn't know. He doesn't believe my ideas about this flying lights. But he says, they often travel along certain routes over stream beds, for example. Stream beds or dry stream beds, of course, most of the time. But these stream beds, and so that has something to do with the energy level under the ground, and some kind of will cause that. No. I know from research of 17 and a half years that in North America, there are in some places where the pterosaurs are seen in daylight flying over storm channels. They use them to navigate at night, and occasionally something will happen in one of these flying creatures. I believe they're rampharingoid pterosaur, like ropen. A ropen will, for whatever reason, will come out in daylight. Where will it fly? The same place it flies at night, over the storm channel, along the storm channel. Sometimes a few feet away, sometimes 50 feet away, 100 feet away, but they will use those storm channels to navigate. And if they have a problem, they come out at daytime, they will still navigate according to that. And I believe it's the same thing in the Marfa, Texas area, that these are related to the ropen, and they behave the same way. At nighttime, they will fly along the stream beds just to navigate. I don't have proof of this. It's circumstantial evidence, but it's a number of circumstantial evidences. So I submit that. Believe what you will, and I won't be too shocked if it turns out to be something different, maybe a bioluminescence in some bird that the scientists have not discovered yet or known about in terms of bioluminescence. Whatever it is, it's not from non-living things. These are not from energy forces in the ground, or earthquakes, or anything like that. So, let's get ready to wrap this up. I'm going to get ready to go to church here. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, or if you have any reported sightings. Now this video, this live stream, and it's been going on for what, almost 50 minutes. Will be on my channel, which is called by my name, Jonathan Whitcomb. This is not my channel I usually use, which is Protect Animal Life. This is a different YouTube channel. Jonathan Whitcomb is the name of the channel, not just my name. So just check out the videos I have on this channel. It's an older channel, smaller than Protect Animal Life. Not nearly as many videos about these incredible flying creatures, but still it has some different videos about modern pterosaurs, pterodactyls, flying dinosaurs. So thank you for coming, and I might do this in the future, possibly on a Sunday or other, but this is the fiery flying serpent video on the channel, quote, Jonathan Whitcomb, unquote.